Hello YouTube, and welcome again to my channel. This time I thought I would talk about honesty and Jehovah's Witnesses. Now this is not specifically about individual Jehovah's Witnesses, because in fact most Jehovah's Witnesses are indeed very honest people. This is not universally true. There are some extremely dishonest Jehovah's Witnesses, and this goes true up to all levels in the organization. In fact, myself, I knew at least one elder, probably more, that I would classify as being a pathological liar. So in general though, this is not about individual witnesses, but rather this is about the organization. Because Watchtower teaches Jehovah's Witnesses to be honest. But are they themselves honest? Do they themselves set the example? Well, in some of my other videos, I've highlighted some things about their past that they have currently misrepresented. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the way they represent information in their literature. So I'm going to talk about propaganda. They identified a propaganda technique in the Awake of 2000 of June 22nd on page 6. And one topic of manipulation of information is entitled name calling. And that paragraph says some people insult those who disagree with them by questioning character or motives instead of focusing on the facts. Name calling slaps a negative, easy to remember label onto a person, a group, or an idea. The name caller hopes that the label will stick. If people reject the person or the idea on the basis of the negative label instead of weighing the evidence for themselves, the name caller's strategy has worked. So let's see now when they employ that particular tactic of name calling. This is in the Watchtower of 1986. It's 315, page 19, paragraph 14. Allow no place for the devil. It says, paragraph 14, finally, we might consider what the Society has published in the past on chronology. Some opposers claim that Jehovah's Witnesses are false prophets. These opponents say that dates have been set, but nothing has happened. Again, we ask, what is the motive of these critics? So, right here you see them employing the tactic which they just brought out of name calling. Instead of addressing the situation with their chronology, they immediately question the motives of anybody who would question their chronology. So they're using a technique there that they know to be propaganda. And along the same lines with 1914, they have published many times the way that they reason on how to arrive at 1914. And all of this are based on historical dates for the destruction of Jerusalem. However, in October and November of 2011, they published an article in their Watchtower. It was a two-part article on when Jerusalem was destroyed. And in that, the evidence they presented that they tried to ignore largely dismantles any possible claim they have to be able to substantiate their date for the fall of Jerusalem. And there is a significant amount of historical evidence that is impossible to overcome. In fact, there would have to have been a conspiracy involving almost the entire ancient Babylonian world and ancient Egyptian world for it to have happened the way they said it was, which is just not even plausible. So instead of being honest and dealing with the information in an honest manner, they try to misrepresent it, and they regularly misrepresent scholars when they present their opinions on things. In fact, when they quote people in their journals or in their books, they oftentimes don't cite exactly where they're quoting them from. So you have to do a little bit of digging to go and find those quotes. But when you do, you oftentimes find that the quote has been taken out of place, or they've left out significant portions of it so as to give a different opinion than the original author actually intended to give. And that's purposefully misrepresenting them. So therefore that is a less than honest practice. And no doubt we all remember from school when we wrote research papers, we had to cite our sources so that anybody who wanted to, that was reading our work, could go and look up the place where we got the information from. If you're honest, that's not a problem. You have no problem demonstrating that you have quoted and correctly applied your source material. The Watchtower, though, oftentimes doesn't give you the full source material to make it very hard to go and find their original source material and what the original author really sent. Also, too, they have at times claimed that their writing department pays close attention to even the smallest, most unimportant details. If this is the case, the question I would have is, what day did Charles Taze Russell really come down and announce the end of the Gentile times? I believe it was in 1958, or there was some watchtower in the 50s, or some publication in the 50s where it was stated that was October 1st. And the most recent publication, God's Kingdom Rules, stated it was October 2nd. So did Charles Taze Russell come down twice and say the Gentile times had ended? Or which one of those days was it? And if they can't even keep track of information that's within their own library, how do we possibly expect them to keep track of information that other people have written? And you could make the argument that perhaps one of those days was a typo, but for the number of people that are checking over that material, I find that highly questionable. So it's fairly easy to make the case that in their presentation of information, the Watchtower is often at times less than completely honest with the way they present information. So if this is the organization that's telling their adherents to be honest in everything, the question one might ask is, why is it that they don't apply the same standard to themselves? And in fact, if you ever happen to be online and you look at individuals who are defending the Watchtower, you will find they employ the very same tactics that the Watchtower does. They selectively quote information that only agrees with their point. They misrepresent things that have been presented through the historical course of the organization. And they cherry pick. Their arguments oftentimes are devoid of anything that resembles logic. In fact, another article that the Watchtower wrote about propaganda, this shows a typical argument technique for Watchtower. And so I want to use this. It's from the Watchtower 2003, 715, pages 21 through 23, entitled Think Straight, Act Wisely. So this is all about ways to think and about propaganda. It talks about not deceiving yourself and what have you. Or excuse me, actually the article I'm going to quote from is The Awake 2000, June 22nd, pages 4 through 8, The Manipulation of Information. So 2000, June 22nd, pages 4 through 8, and that's an Awake. So it talks about a history of propaganda. The second or third paragraph in there says, the cunning propagandist loves such shortcuts, especially those that short-circuit rational thought. Propaganda encourages this by agitating the emotions, by exploiting insecurities, by capitalizing on the ambiguity of language, and by bending rules of logic. As history bears out, such tactics can prove all too effective. So notice there, they realize that propaganda involves bending the rules of logic. Therefore, anytime an argument is presented that includes logical fallacies, it is not a valid argument. It's bending logic. So some of the propaganda techniques they cite are lies, which is self-explanatory. Then another one they cite is making generalizations. It says, another very successful tactic of propaganda is generalization. Generalizations tend to obscure important facts about the real issues in question, and they are frequently used to demean entire groups of people. Maybe like worldly people? Well, it doesn't say that. And then the next technique that it talks about is name calling. The first sentence there says, some people insult those who disagree with them by questioning character or motives instead of focusing on the facts. And we've dealt with that already. Then there's playing on emotions, slogans and symbols. But this part is interesting. They ask the question, is the work of Jehovah's Witnesses propagandistic? And I'll read just a little bit of that. It says, some opponents of Jehovah's Witnesses have accused them of spreading Zionist propaganda. Others have charged that the ministry of witnesses promotes communism. Still others have claimed that the work of Jehovah's Witnesses promotes the ideals and interests of the American imperialism. And there are those who assert that witnesses are anarchists, fomenting disorder with the aim of changing the social, economic, political, or legal order. So none of those things has anything to do with whether or not Jehovah's Witnesses are propagandistic. None of it talks about the way they present their material. What this is doing is it's called making a straw man argument. They know that they can't defeat the argument, so they make a fake argument. They divert your attention to that fake argument, and then they knock it down. No one asked whether or not Jehovah's Witnesses promoted communism. That's a completely separate question from whether or not they're propagandists. No one asked if they were Zionists or spreading Zionist propaganda. They just asked the question of, are they propagandistic? We didn't specify any specific type of propaganda. And then no one made the claim that they were promoting the interests of American imperialism. That does not begin to address the question of whether or not Jehovah's Witnesses are propagandistic. So when they put down that question of whether or not they engage in propaganda, they immediately engaged in propaganda to divert from answering the question. And this is a tactic that they use on a regular basis when they are defending themselves. For example, their website asks the question of whether or not Jehovah's Witnesses shun, and immediately they change the topic. They don't ever truthfully answer the question of whether they shun people who leave their religion. The truth of the matter is, if you discontinue your association with Jehovah's Witnesses, if you minimize your association with Jehovah's Witnesses, they will treat you differently. They are instructed to do that. They won't invite you to their gatherings. They won't associate with you. They'll talk about you. They'll think that you're spiritually weak, that you need help. This will include members of your family who are Jehovah's Witnesses that will treat people that way, that have stopped associating. And if they come to realize that you're engaging in a course of action they disagree with, they will in fact minimize or completely eliminate any contact with you. So that is in effect what they do. That's what they're taught to do. They're taught to minimize and eliminate their association with people who are not spiritual. And if you have been an individual who at one time was a baptized member of the congregation, or even if you just associated for a long time with the congregation, if you discontinue doing that, even if you don't get yourself into any trouble, they will always look upon you as someone who's spiritually weak and someone that they don't talk to that much. Now, if you get disfellowshipped or disassociated, or you disassociate yourself, they will indeed shun you. They are not to talk to you. Even within families, members are not supposed to talk to their disfellowshipped or disassociated family members. I know because I had family members who were disfellowshipped and disassociated, and I did not talk to them very much. I upheld the arrangement. So that's my first-hand experience, and the vast majority of witnesses will do the same exact thing, including for their family members. And there are some horror stories about people getting kicked out of their house. In fact, when I was an elder, one of the other elders had somebody who was disfellowshipped in their family, and that person came on hard financial times and had to move back in with their parents. And when that happened, the circuit overseer instructed us to review the qualifications of that brother for helping his disfellowshipped family member, for allowing them to live under the same roof as him. So, are Jehovah's Witnesses really honest? And again, this is not about individual Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm not out to assault or offend anybody. But this is about the organization as a whole. The way they present information is at times misleading, most likely purposefully so. You can make that decision for yourself. The truth does not need false logic, false reasoning, incomplete quotations from sources. The truth does not require those things to defend it or to establish it. The truth stands on its own merit and is easily defended. So, that's my video for this time. Thanks for watching.